I mean, essentially in Canada now, we're hiring based on race. You're excluding people. These speech requirements, this is compelled or censorship. A lot of these things just go against many of our values. And this, it was before I was going to apply for a grant, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And this person said to me, you know, I've made my peace with EDI. I will lie about my most deeply held values on paper in order to get funding. And so I think that's what some people have just made that deal with the devil in order to keep their labs running.
Geoff Horsman is an associate professor of chemistry and biochemistry at Wilfrid Laurier University in Ontario. He's also an outspoken critic of EDI, equity, inclusion and diversity practices in universities. And he's recently contributed to the book The War on Science, with an essay on EDI, the Dismal Pseudoscience Threatening Science. So, Geoff Horsman, thank you very much indeed for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me, Geoff, why do you call equity, inclusion, and diversity a pseudoscience?
Well, I guess principally because I don't think there's any solid empirical evidence to support it. And I think if I might, I would provide an example. And to give you a sense of how I think this is perhaps more appropriately thought of as a religion, the guide says this. It says, systemic barriers are sometimes invisible to those who do not experience them. But nonetheless, all individuals must acknowledge the existence of systemic barriers. Okay, so as a scientist, you are required to state that you acknowledge something as existing that you cannot measure, detect, see, weigh, test. It is only accessible to certain people and not others. So I think you might agree that this would violate some of the basic rules of science.
The thing is that, if I understand you rightly, then, that academics, such as yourself, every academic in the university, if they wish to obtain money for their research, funding for their research, gain a grant of some kind for their research, they have to write a bid of some kind. And what you're saying is that every bid that goes in needs to have some kind of EDI statement attached to it, and that without that, your funding will not come. Am I right?
That is correct. My own university has a university research professor award. So distinguished researchers at the university apply for it, and if they get it, you know, it's maybe $10,000 in a course remission or something like that, and you know, it's a prestigious designation because you're one of the top scholars at the university. Now, as one of the criteria for this award, it now says you must demonstrate in your application how you have embedded equity, diversity, and inclusion into your research. So this, this is clearly showing the next step is now to move research into the direction of equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's an ideological test for.
How long has this kind of thing been going on for? I mean, how long has it been the case that you've had to use EDI statements in order to get funding, to get advancement in your university? I mean, that never was the case when I was first starting off at university. We never even heard of EDI, and now it's become kind of an essential component.
It hasn't been happening very long. The first time I noticed it seriously was in an application for a grant in 2021, where they had a section of the grant. Well, actually, a major component of the grant was equity, diversity, and inclusion. And you must write a fairly substantial portion or a pretty significant statement about how you will incorporate this or address it. And what was notable here is that it was pass fail. So if you fail that statement, your grant application does not even go to scientific review. They're not even going to read your scientific research proposal.
So let me get this clear then. So what you're saying is someone can have a valid, even an important scientific research proposal,
Yeah,
but it can fail even before it gets to be considered as a scientific proposal purely on moral and political grounds.
that's correct. That's correct. You have to pass the EDI as a first stage, just pass fail, yes or no. And if you pass it, then it can go and they can look at evaluate the research, but it's a screening tool. And maybe this will just make it'll bring in a wider pool of people. I think that's how it's sold. And if you kind of don't scratch the surface too much and think too hard about it, it sounds kind of reasonable. And again, if you assume that this is an empirically verified scientific approach has been shown to yield benefits. Of course, none of that is true. And so now, of course, when you peel back the layers on the onion, you realize it's just a moral philosophy, I think a flawed and dark one.
But these are moral imperatives, aren't they? They're moral issues, which is why I mentioned things like the Ten Commandments. They might as well ask you to prove that you don't lie or cheat or steal, because they would have an impact morally on research, maybe even more so.
And but here's the the irony of that is that in fact the EDI statements encourage people to lie.
Explain that.
So in fact, I've been told that. I have a colleague at another institution. We were commiserating about this nonsense and how, this is really against our values, right? Many of these things, like racial discrimination. I mean, essentially in Canada now, we're hiring based on race. You're excluding people. These speech requirements, this is compelled or censorship. A lot of these things just go against many of our values. And this, it was before I was going to apply for a grant, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And this person said to me, I've made my peace with EDI. I will lie about my most deeply held values on paper in order to get funding. And so I think that's what some people have just made that deal with the devil in order to keep their labs running.
You mentioned in your article here, in your essay, that you have something called an inclusive excellence program at L'Oreal. That's part of this process, isn't it? What is this exclusive excellence program and how does it work? What's that about?
So in 2020, of course, there was the George Floyd panic, Black Lives Matter. And so then, as part of an atonement for these social ills, many universities in Canada, including our own, started doing race-based hiring. Preferential hiring is another term for it. And so the inclusive excellence program at our university was to hire 6 Black scholars and 6 Indigenous scholars.
Does it work the other way around? Can you advertise for 6 white professors?
I don't think you could, because they have, in fact, in a lot of these programs and probably in law, they define something called equity deserving groups.
Right.
And really, if you go down the list, it really excludes everyone except straight white men. Because women
so this
are
is really what the issue is about EDI. I think we're getting to it, is the fact that there is a built-in discrimination, despite the fact that it's designed to remove discrimination. It's diverse, it's equitable, it's inclusive. But the fact of the matter is that when it comes down to its practice, it actually builds in some form of alternative discrimination.
Well, yes, in practice it does. And then the concrete policy implications are all discriminatory. They're excluding people from employment if they have the wrong phenotype. They are telling you what words you can't say, telling you you must agree to EDI in order to be full participant in society or many aspects of it, particularly with respect to public funds. So yeah, I think I would disagree that there's any that it has any value in terms of removing discrimination.
You've actually been reasonably outspoken in your university, from what I was reading, that you've raised at least some objections to it. Can you tell us what happened with that?
Yeah, I mean, I raised a few objections. I mean, first of all, with this particular program, this inclusive excellence program, I tried to raise concerns really to protect the department, because we were actually awarded one of these positions for an Indigenous scholar. And a colleague in another department, or in another outside of the department, mentioned to me that they were aware of a Black, I think, postdoc somewhere. And they messaged me and said, hey, I know of this great Black postdoc. And I had to say and respond to this person and say, well, Blacks are disqualified from applying. Now, it seems to me that we don't really need to say much more than that. That now we are, there's kind of this horseshoe theory of politics, you just, now we are really, how, in order to fix or to wrong historical injustice against Black people, I mean, particularly in the southern US, now we're preventing them from applying for faculty positions in order to correct. I mean, none of it makes any sense. And I think it wouldn't be, I don't think it would be too harsh to say it's evil.
Well, there was something else you mentioned in your essay, and that is that you decided you'd have a discussion about EDI with one of your classes.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I decided to have one, the course was, it's 3 hours a week. And so I just decided to devote one of those class times to EDI. And I did it as I thought any scientist, or not even scientist, just any thinking person who wants to learn about something and really understand it well, you should take a John Stuart Mill type of approach and try to make sure you understand all sides, right? He who knows only his own side knows very little.
Yeah.
So I assembled a panel of people both for and against EDI. Not long after, I began to hear some rumors, mostly from some other faculty and some, students telling me that people were talking about this. And I was not very popular. They're complaining about me. But, I didn't think too much of it. I was taken for lunch by some colleagues. And, sort of at the end of that lunch, it just kind of came like, look, people have been talking about you. And people have been complaining. And it's about EDI. And, just the word of the wise here, you should probably just stop talking about it, because these things can kind of get out of hand. You've got a family, you've got children, you don't want to lose your job.
Sounds like a threat.
Well, it wasn't a threat. I want to be clear about
a friend warning.
Yeah, it was like, it was done in kindness and love, but it was communicating that is what people think. That is the mindset of the faculty. At the time, I was a little bit rattled because now I would probably approach things differently, but at the time I was kind of rattled. I mean, I didn't say I'm going to stop talking about it. I was clear on that. but it did kind of, you know, when someone says that to you, it's kind of, it's hard to process, like where, you know, because I think it takes a while to come to terms that, you know, growing up in a free Western society, you kind of make assumptions that you're free or that things are working well. And when you're confronted with things like this, you realize, well, there's somewhere between where I thought we were and 1984. Like so I feel like we're somewhere on that trajectory, and it's actually quite uncomfortable to face that.
You said that you were rattled then, but you might handle things differently now. What would you do differently?
So, but I mean, certainly now I would just, you know, okay, walk me through it. Explain to me what you mean. You know, just ask questions, because that's a really good way to flesh it out. Because I found what I was doing before is I was like, oh, they mean this, and I was jumping steps, and then you didn't actually get them to tell you exactly. So I just kind of made all these assumptions, and without actually, okay, I want this to be clarified. Who told, you know, where'd you get this idea? What would make you think this? Okay, did someone talk to you about this? Then we should go talk to them. I want names. I'm going to start, because now I would go and I would start writing people. I'd go, you know, I'd go to the union. I would just document, you know, and just keep pushing. I mean, to the extent that I have time, but I think that would be the approach I would take now, and just be very open about it. It's the best defense.
Do you get any formal warnings, or did anyone in admin tell you that you need to stop this?
It was more of a come in for a chat, you know, kind of like, you really shouldn't do this. And then I would say, so I can't talk with, oh, no, you can talk, you know. So it's kind of like they knew they couldn't really cross the line. They still said silly things. Like they would say, even in emails, they would say things like EDI is not debatable. I mean, I have that in emails. If we want to get to the truth, what are we putting off the table here? Come on, we gotta, buckle up. Let's talk.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think anyone who would say that something is not debatable, first of all, I don't think they really believe that. I'm not sure.
They just want to close down debate, maybe.
I think it's more that this is the doctrine we have to accept. It's just to get money. Let's not make waves. Let's just, come on, just do what you need to do, and we'll get money and stop causing problems. That's kind of the sense.
This brings us back to the idea of pseudoscience, then, doesn't it? It's more dogma than science in its approach.
Yeah, and I think the formal term that's been knocking around in my brain for the last couple of weeks is prescribed doctrine. I don't know if that means anything to you.
No, what's it mean?
Prescribed doctrine. The reason that particular term comes up is because it's in the Canadian Association of University Teachers. I also think in the United States as well, there are actual formal definitions of academic freedom. No. And they describe how there shall not be a prescribed doctrine that you have to adhere to. No. And so we've been trying to challenge things like this university research professorship under the academic freedom clause of our collective agreement, that there's a prescribed doctrine. But I don't know. It's hard to know if anyone buys this. But it feels to me that this is, you must profess adherence to the faith in order to, get money, awards. So it's incentives, not just punishment, but incentives as well.
You also have something else in L'Oreal called a inclusive research. It's a kind of a course for lecturers, I think. Can you tell us something about that?
When I was trying to get this grant that required this EDI statement pass-fail, I was trying to learn about this, and so I looked at this course, and I just thought it was nonsense.
What was in it?
Well, it was, I haven't reviewed it for a while now, but it was the usual things like videos and discussions about intersectionality, positionality, power and privilege. You know, the concept of the wheel
Yeah.
of privilege. If you're white, you got more privilege than if you're darker skin. They never
Highly controversial theories, which are being presented what, as facts?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. These are presented as fact. And what's interesting, and especially as I know this now, that you read these papers, these are not scientific papers. These are critical theory papers. They don't
Yeah.
even have methods. They just survey people who think like them, and they say how useful this is and how included they feel. And it's just all, there's nothing rigorous about it.
Yes,
Uh,
I know. I mean, the idea of white privilege, I believe, first appeared in a paper by someone called Peggy McIntosh,
Unpacking
unpacking.
the invisible backpack.
That's right. But if you read the paper, and I've had to look at it, there's not a single footnote, there's not a single reference, there's not a single set of results. There's nothing empirical about it. It's entirely a subjective set of feelings. And
Mhm.
in where I come from, that wouldn't pass as a scientific paper. Maybe a reflective personal diary entry, but not much more than that. And yet,
Yeah.
whole host of um, teaching is built upon that slender kind of approach.
Mhm. Well, you look at now there's a small cottage industry of people going through PhD theses now and looking at a PhD thesis as an autoethnography, basically someone writing about themselves and their experience.
Yeah.
Somehow they're oppressed somehow, and they write a whole PhD thesis on this. This is not scholarship. I don't know what it is. I think it's just you're getting government money and funding to just miseducate people.
I've had students come to me proposing a thesis based upon some kind of autoethnography, some kind of commenting like that, and I've refused it. And
Aren't you in computer science?
and yes, and pointed them directly at, let's do some experiments, something empirical, go and measure something, and then we'll talk about that, which gladly
Wow.
they did. So, I mean, that was a plus point, I would think, on at least on
But
one.
that's surprising because presumably these are computer science or math students coming to you to propose doing a PhD. So presumably they have an undergraduate degree at least. So where would they get even the idea
Well,
to propose?
this was from someone who'd been away from education for a while
Okay.
and was a teacher in a school.
Oh, that makes
They
more sense.
come under a lot of influence in that area, and then want to come back and improve their qualifications, become a master in a particular field. And then the suggestion is, let's do something ethnographically with my teaching in mind. And the answer is
Mhm.
no. Well, for me, at anyway, it's no. Let's have something which is substantial
Right. Yeah.
and empirical.
Right.
And I mean, I don't blame the students for that. Very often the students are misled by the environment in which they're in, and they sort of absorb this kind of idea that this is science, when certainly from my point of view, and presumably from yours too, this is nowhere near science.
No. Yeah. No, not at all.
Um, what do your colleagues make of it? You've mentioned briefly that some people have said that they play the game, basically. But why is there such silence, I suppose? Is everyone afraid of putting their head above the parapet as you have done?
This is a really interesting question. Um, I was talking to a colleague, um, an older colleague of mine close to retirement, and they were saying, 30 years ago, it wasn't like this. 30 years ago, academics in Canada, people were very open, you debate things, people weren't scared to talk. But over time, it's just become this very stifled, repressed environment. You can feel it in the air. You just know. I don't know how you know, but people just know. Don't say anything on this particular topic. Don't transgress by proposing anything that challenges the predominant EDI worldview with respect to Black, Indigenous, trans, you name it.
Would you say there's fear here?
Yes, I would say there's fear. I mean, I think if you have colleagues telling you, you'll lose your job maybe if you talk about it. But there's also a willful ignorance, I think, at play. People don't want to know. They really, like I said, it was very uncomfortable for me to realize we're on there's an incipient totalitarianism happening here. And that's very disturbing to acknowledge. I think a lot of people, if you just go about your day and look around you, things can maybe seem normal. And I think a lot of people want to take comfort in that. They'll put on a hockey game. They'll just like to pretend things are okay. And if I had $1 for every time someone said, oh, the pendulum will swing back, just keep your head down. Things will self-correct, as though Western civilization is just a natural resting state. It drives me nuts. Liberty has to be defended. I'm sort of at the point where now I fear, my greater fear is not speaking.
Yeah.
And by not speaking and not confronting this and not doing all I can, what am I doing? I feel it by doing that, I'm betraying future generations. And past generations.
And you talk about self-betrayal as well within the book.
Yeah, I think it is a self-betrayal to lie.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, what do you have but your integrity?
Yeah.
Material wealth, jobs come and go. That can be taken at any time.
Jordan Peterson powerfully makes the point that you should never do anything which makes you weaker.
Yes.
And being someone who I think stays quiet when you feel you ought to talk, or just writes an EDI statement when you feel that you don't believe what you're writing, I think falls into that category of things that make you weaker.
That's what I think. And I was having a discussion today, for example, with someone saying, well, I just wrote a grant and I didn't think it was that bad because, in the EDI section, I could just say how I could talk about mentorship and these things. But to me, because what EDI is, all of the darkness in that ideology. I see it as counter to Western civilization. And I think this person agrees with me that broadly, but they thought, well, I don't have to say I'm actually promoting those aspects of it. But I disagree, because I think what you're doing is you're laundering EDI. You're making excuses for it. And I think what we need now is to confront it head on. And in fact, I lost my grant renewal recently because I did that in the application. I said that, in effect, I did try to work within the bounds of the requirements of the grant application by addressing EDI, but I said I will work towards an inclusive training environment by making sure that all people feel welcome and that they can speak their mind. And we know about 2/3 of Canadians disagree with EDI. So that means I want to make sure that those who disagree with EDI are included, right? That's an inclusive environment. And science works best, not necessarily that you have people who agree or disagree with EDI, because that's a little bit, but that you have a culture where people feel free to say what they think. And EDI emphasizes a culture in opposition to that. So if you're saying that you have to say certain things, or if you should censor yourself, tone it down, not really, or think before you speak, I don't think that leads to the vigorous, dynamic environment of ideas that is consistent with doing good science or with good anything, running a restaurant, anything. I think we want to make sure that we get people who take some risks with their ideas and don't worry if they get it wrong and can, like, I think that's how science works best. And I think EDI, through its culture, works against that. So
There's
that's why
really
I think,
there's really a deception here, then, is what you're saying. That whereas it speaks about diversity, it's actually against diversity, real diversity, diversity of viewpoint. And whereas it speaks of inclusion, it's actually against being inclusive because it won't include those people who have a different point of view.
yeah,
And that's more than an irony. That is a deception, isn't it?
it is a deception. And it's interesting. Our federal government, the opposition party, the conservatives, are really hammering against EDI, or it's more popularly known as DEI. And so they have a science and research standing committee, and they invited me as a witness and several other people on different sides of the issue.
Mm.
And I was up in Ottawa testifying about a month ago, or a little less. And all the people advocating for EDI, they're no longer making the arguments that, oh, we need the racial quotas in hiring to even things out, or we need to make sure that we have inclusive language. They've kind of quietly abandoned those arguments, which are actually what EDI is doing. And they've retreated almost entirely to, oh, it's about research design. And they keep bringing up things like, oh, seatbelt design. Initially they used crash test dummies that were just more representative of the larger male body. And so as a result, more women got injured in crashes. So that's why we need diverse perspectives. We need more women in science to account for that. Now, first of all, I don't agree with that, because I think science, when functioning properly, when people are free to say what they think and all sorts of ideas are flowing, it's a massive social network that is really good at seeking out error and figuring out ways to correct it. So I think if you started to look at the data and see that more women were getting injured by seatbelts, it doesn't take a female brain to notice that data problem. Or at least I'm not aware that it does, that certain types of problems in the data are restricted to certain ethnic groups or sexual orientations or sexes and so on. So first of all, I think there's a problem there. But secondly, I think this belies what's called the Mott and Bailey tactic, right? You've probably heard of this.
Explain that for us.
So the Mott and Bailey tactic is where, I think well, your English probably know this better than I do. With castles, you would have a really well protected motte, and then you'd have a nice bailey, the fields where the sheep and cattle are, and you can go and spread around and be more comfortable. But when you're under attack, you retreat back into the motte. You're safe, but you can't really do much.
Yeah.
And so this is, with respect to EDI, a few years ago when the EDI people had the run of things, they were doing sweeping racial discrimination. They're out in the Bailey, pushing speech restrictions, race-based hiring and the like. And now that they're under fire and retreating a bit, now they're back to, oh, it's just making sure that we have good research design. Again, I think that's nonsense. I don't buy it for a second. But that was almost all of the arguments that I saw at the committee. And I did mention during the questioning that I had to address that Mott and Bailey tactic.
Yeah. The fact that everyone goes along with it for the most part, what are the costs as far as you're concerned with just going along with the crowd?
Well, I think what you said is that it makes you weaker. It makes you small. And when you betray yourself like that, there's a bit of a shame. So, are you more or less likely to stand up the next time something happens? I would say you're probably less likely because you already feel a little bit ashamed about yourself. You think less of yourself.
You
And
you kind of imply that part of the raison d'etre, the reason behind having to say write an EDI statement, is to almost put you in your place, so to speak, to demoralize in and of itself. I mean, you mentioned, for example, a very interesting, you reference Václav Havel and his story about the greengrocer who puts a sign up in the window, together with his signs which say carrots 50p or whatever it may be. It's more like workers of the world unite, the slogan of the month, and another slogan comes in and he has to put another slogan in. And they put all these slogans in the window, not because they believe them, but
right,
because it's expected and because he's basically saying, I want to be left alone. And
yeah,
it's a humiliation, really, to show that I have to do this because it's
yeah,
required of me, but I don't believe any of it whatsoever. And
yeah.
things like EDI are a bit like that.
I think they are. I think just like you have to put a workers of the world unite sign in your window to operate. You can easily rationalize that away. Oh, it's just a sign. What's the big deal? And it's very similar for saying, oh, I am committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion. Say, oh, that's what's the big deal. I mean, I can just use almost boilerplate. Some people say, I just use Chat GPT to write it. It's no big deal. Um, I disagree. I think you're compromising yourself. Um, what? Why should I trust anything you have to say if you're just repeating government pablum? Like, how do I know you're not doing that for other parts of your application or in other aspects of your life? Why are you a trustworthy person?
It comes down to integrity at the end of the day.
I think so. And if I might say, there's another wonderful book I read, I listened to the audiobook, and it's also an amazing four-part, you know, each 45-minute type documentary on, I believe it's Angel Studios. It's called Live Not by Lies by
Right.
Rod Dreher. And I cannot recommend that highly enough. Now, one of the central characters in the theme is Mrs. Benda in Prague. And she's a mathematician like yourself, or maybe computer science. Well, she was a mathematician. And Václav Havel, came to their apartment, during the 1960s. They were sort of this band of dissidents in the Czech Republic. And there's one scene that just got to me. And especially with respect to, my colleagues saying, think about your kids, for their sake, you should just lie and go along with this or just keep your mouth shut. And there's this amazing scene where Mrs. Benda and her husband, I think his name was also Václav Benda, they were contemplating what to do. And it was filmed, so you actually see them discussing. I don't know what they were doing filming, but anyway, they were discussing what to do. I think it was 1968. I believe that was the 20th anniversary of the communist takeover of Czechoslovakia. And the party wanted everyone to hang some flags in their windows for this celebration. And the Bendas were discussing, should we do this? And I think Mrs. Benda brought up that one of the children was saying how much she admired, the child admired their father for the fact that he was doing what was right. And they decided, no, we're not going to do flags. It's for the children. They need to see their parents are people of integrity. And elsewhere in the book, they talk about how many of the parents who made compromises so their kids could go to better schools, that later on the children lost some respect for their parents for that. That in fact, it tells you that your integrity is so much more valuable than those material advantages in the moment. It's transcendent, and we should hold on to it like it's as precious as it is. And so yeah, I can't recommend that that book and that documentary highly enough.
Geoff Horsman, thank you very much indeed for very important talk today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Philip. It was an absolute pleasure.